He saw a mop bucket. He saw a faded gray work uniform worn at the elbows. He saw a black man carrying a folded blue tarp over one shoulder, moving on foot toward the South Security checkpoint of the Pentagon, one of the most secure buildings on the planet, at 7:43 in the morning. What Officer Bryce Harmon of the Pentagon Force Protection Agency did not see was the 4 rows of ribbons typically pinned to that man's chest. He did not see the rank. He did not see the career. He did not see the 38 years. He saw a man who did not, in his estimation, belong at this gate, and he decided, in the span of 4 seconds and without consulting a single record, that he was going to do something about it. The morning of October 14th at the Pentagon's south parking entrance was gray and cold, the kind of mid-autumn chill that settles into the Virginia air like a held breath before a storm. The security checkpoint hummed with its usual rhythm, vehicles queuing in the vehicle lanes, a cluster of contractors and civilian personnel filing through the pedestrian lane with badges already extended, the smell of coffee from a portable cart near the guardhouse. The man Harmon had fixed on did not look like the others. He was 61 years old, lean, with the careful, economical posture of someone who had spent decades not wasting a single movement. He wore gray work trousers, a matching gray shirt with a maintenance patch over the breast pocket, and a pair of steel-toed boots with the scuffs of extended use. The blue tarp over his shoulder was folded neatly, its corners aligned. The mop bucket he rolled at his side had a long handle and a rinse attachment, the kind of heavy-duty unit used for large surface commercial cleaning. His name to the checkpoint was Roy Caldwell. It was on the visitor log. It was on the daily maintenance roster filed by Pentagon Facilities Management the afternoon prior. He was listed under contracted custodial services, a designation that placed him in a queue of roughly 40 individuals cleared for non-recurring facility access on any given day. He had cleared this checkpoint before. Many times, in many configurations, under circumstances Officer Bryce Harmon could not begin to imagine. Today, he was here for a specific reason. A reason that had nothing to do with cleaning. He handed his visitor badge to the scanner. Officer Harmon stepped forward. "Hold on." The man stopped. He looked at Harmon. His expression was easy, settled, the expression of someone who has been alive long enough to know exactly what kind of moment this is. "This badge." Harmon took it, turned it over. "Where'd you get this?" "It was issued by Facilities Management, sir. It's on the daily roster." "You're a contractor?" "Maintenance services." "Pentagon Facilities." Harmon looked him up and down. The mop bucket, the gray uniform, the blue tarp. "Step out of the line." The pedestrian lane at the south checkpoint moved in a single-file stream, and being pulled from it was visible. The people behind Roy Caldwell adjusted without comment, the practiced indifference of a city of contractors who had seen 1,000 minor delays at a federal building entrance. But 2 of them glanced back. One of them, a woman in her 40s carrying a leather portfolio, paused half a step before the person behind her nudged her forward. Roy Caldwell rolled his mop bucket to the secondary inspection area, a concrete platform set 8 feet from the main lane, shaded by a metal canopy. He set the handle of the bucket against the railing. He waited. Harmon came around the counter with his notepad. He was 29 years old, 2 years into his posting with the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, and had the particular energy of a man who enjoyed the authority of the job more than the responsibility of it. He had never been in the military. He had applied twice to the Marine Corps and been rejected, a detail he had long since filed under their loss in the archive of his self-regard. "Name," Harmon said. "Roy Caldwell." "Where are you from?" "Virginia. Woodbridge." "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" A small pause, a nearly invisible one. "A long time," the man said. Harmon made a note. He looked at the mop bucket. "That thing go through security screening?" "It went through the equipment checkpoint at the contractor lot, stamped at 0730. Harmon reached for the bucket's handle, lifted the mop head, peered inside. He was looking for nothing specific. He was performing authority. "You got any other ID on you?" "Something besides the facility badge." "I have a driver's license." "Let me see it." Roy Caldwell reached into his breast pocket slowly with the careful deliberateness of a man who understood the arithmetic of sudden movements at a federal security gate and produced a Virginia driver's license. He held it out. Harmon looked at it, looked at the face, looked at the man, Roy Caldwell. The license showed 61 years old. Address in Woodbridge. Height 6'1". Weight 185. "You do this run every week?" "When I'm called in." "You been called in before to this checkpoint specifically?" "Yes." "By who?" "Pentagon Facilities Management. You can call the duty officer." "I'll decide what I need to call." Harmon made another note. "You're going to wait here while I verify your credentials." "Of course." The man folded his hands and waited. He was extraordinarily still, not the stillness of someone frightened or someone resigned or even someone particularly patient. It was the stillness of someone who had mastered it as a professional discipline, who had learned, in environments where stillness was the difference between success and catastrophe, to simply wait without expenditure. Behind the stillness, Roy Caldwell was doing a specific kind of accounting. He noted the position of the cameras, 3 of them at angles that covered the secondary inspection area. Noted the checkpoint supervisor, a woman named Sergeant Elaine Rios, who was standing at the main counter with her back partially turned, working through a vehicle queue. He noted the timestamp on the electronic board above the entrance, 0749. He needed to clear this checkpoint by 0815. That was the hard constraint. At 0900, inside the building he was standing outside of, a ceremony was scheduled to begin in the Hall of Heroes on the 2nd floor. The ceremony was a formal military retirement, a change of responsibility for the outgoing chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The outgoing chairman was Roy Caldwell. He had arranged the maintenance cover himself. He did it every year for his personal security reviews, entering federal buildings through non-standard credential pathways to test whether access controls could be manipulated. He had done it twice before at the Pentagon, twice at Fort Bragg, and once at a facility in Colorado Springs that he would not name in this account. He had flagged 0 vulnerabilities in all prior exercises. The systems had held. Today, the system had produced a different kind of result. He had not anticipated Harmon. Not this specific version of Harmon, the improvisation of someone who had no probable cause, no flagged credential, no alert from any system, and had simply decided that the man in front of him required additional scrutiny based on nothing documented and everything visible. Harmon had walked back to the counter and was on the phone. Roy Caldwell watched the timestamp, 0751. He had 24 minutes. Harmon was on the phone for 6 minutes. During those 6 minutes, 2 things happened that would matter later. The first, Sergeant Elaine Rios finished the vehicle queue and looked over at the secondary inspection platform. She saw a man in a maintenance uniform standing with his hands folded, a mop bucket beside him, waiting with the kind of patience that did not match the category of person causing a problem. She made a mental note to check on it. The second, a car entered the south checkpoint vehicle lane and idled through the standard scan. The driver was a man in his mid-50s in a pressed blazer, whose Pentagon building pass placed him as a senior civilian official in the office of the Secretary of Defense. He did not know Roy Caldwell by sight, but he knew the name on the maintenance roster because he had approved the security exercise request the prior afternoon. He looked at the secondary inspection area as he drove through. He did not stop. He parked his car, walked into the building, and immediately pulled out his phone. Back at the checkpoint, Harmon returned from his call. "Facilities management says your name is on the roster," he told Roy Caldwell, "but the duty officer I reached says she doesn't have authorization for today's work order, says it might have been filed under a different contractor number." "The work order was filed under the Pentagon Facilities General Contract umbrella," Caldwell said. "The authorization number is 1147, so you can verify with the facilities director." "I don't have a facilities director number." "The duty officer does." Harmon looked at him. He did not like being navigated. He especially did not like being navigated by someone holding a mop. "Sir, I need you to step back from the gate. I'm already at the secondary area. Further back against the fence." Roy Caldwell moved. He did not argue. He moved to the fence, 4 feet further from the checkpoint entrance, and stood with his back to the chain link and his face toward the building. Harmon called again. This time he reached a different duty officer, a younger one who was new to the post and had not yet been briefed on the security exercise. She pulled up the general contract umbrella and found the work order number, but flagged that the clearance level attached to it, a specific elevated access designation that allowed the badge holder to enter without a standard escort, was unusual for a routine maintenance visit. She flagged it to her supervisor. Her supervisor flagged it upward. In the meantime, Harmon had returned to the platform and made a decision. "Sir, I'm going to need you to surrender your visitor badge pending a full credential review. The access level on this badge is not consistent with a standard maintenance visit." "Officer, the access level is consistent with the nature of this specific visit. If you contact the facilities director, this can be resolved in 2 minutes." "I am conducting the resolution in the manner I see appropriate," Harmon said. "Badge, please." Roy Caldwell removed the badge from the clip on his breast pocket and handed it over. "Now the tarp." He handed over the tarp. "And I'm going to need you to step inside the secondary screening room." The secondary screening room was a small concrete enclosure behind the canopy, with 2 chairs, a table, and a camera in the corner. It was used for credential disputes, enhanced screening of flagged vehicles, and occasionally the kind of situation where someone needed to be held without being formally detained. Roy Caldwell stepped inside. Harmon followed. A second officer, a younger man named Porter who had been watching from the main counter, came to stand in the doorway. "How long have I been on this exercise?" Roy Caldwell asked. "Excuse me?" "Never mind." He sat down in one of the chairs. His watch, 0803, 12 minutes. Harmon stood across the table. He had his notepad, he had the visitor badge, he had the blue tarp folded on the table between them. "You said this was an exercise," Harmon said, frowning. "I didn't say that to you." "Then what did you mean?" "I was speaking to myself." Harmon wrote something, put his pen down, looked at Caldwell. "Sir, I'm going to be straight with you. This badge has an access designation that's above standard maintenance. The work order has a clearance attachment that doesn't match what you're here to do, and you've given me answers that are technically correct but don't add up to a normal contractor visit. That combination tells me something is off, and when something is off at a duty building, I don't wave it through." "That's the right instinct," Roy Caldwell said. Harmon stared at him. "The right instinct," Caldwell continued, "is to verify. The instinct you should have acted on immediately is to call the facility's director, not the duty officer, the director, and verify the authorization number I gave you. That would have resolved this in 90 seconds. I determine the order of verification." "Yes, you do." Caldwell looked at him with the flat, patient attention of a man who has spent 4 decades evaluating other men's decisions. "And the order you chose has cost you 11 minutes and hasn't resolved anything. That is also information." Harmon's face reddened. He reached for the radio on his hip. "I'm calling this in to my supervisor. You'll wait here." He stepped out. Porter remained in the doorway, hands at his sides, not speaking. He was 24 years old and had been in this job for 7 months. He had a specific feeling about this situation that he could not articulate, a low-frequency discomfort that had been building since the man sat down and had not done a single thing that warranted being in a concrete room. He looked at Roy Caldwell. Roy Caldwell looked back at him. "You doing all right, son?" Caldwell asked. "Yes, sir," Porter said. Then he looked surprised that he had said it that way. 0807, 8 minutes. Roy Caldwell reached into the breast pocket of the gray work shirt. Not for identification, not for a phone. He removed a single folded card, small, the size of a business card but heavier stock, and placed it on the table face up. Porter looked at it from the doorway. He couldn't read it from that distance. "You can read it," Caldwell said. Porter came 2 steps closer. He looked at the card. He went very still. He looked at the man sitting in the chair. He looked at the card again. Then he turned and walked quickly out of the room. Roy Caldwell heard him say 3 words to Harmon in the corridor, too low to be fully audible, and then heard Harmon say something dismissive, and then heard nothing for 30 seconds, and then heard Harmon's footsteps fast coming back. Harmon came through the door. He looked at the table. He picked up the card. He read it. Card was an emergency contact index, the kind issued to high-ranking duty personnel for use during field exercises and cover operations when standard credentials are deliberately not carried. It listed a single contact number. The number connected directly to a duty desk in the office of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. At the bottom of the card in small print was a single line of authority text. It named the card's holder. It listed his rank. It listed his office. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General of the Army, Roy T. Caldwell. Harmon's face performed several expressions in rapid succession, none of them dignified. "This is," he started. "A card," Caldwell said. "Call the number." Harmon looked at the card. He looked at the man in the chair, the gray work uniform, the scuffed boots, the folded hands. "Sir, if this is some kind of officer," the word was quiet. It was also final. "Call the number. Tell them your name and badge number and the nature of the hold. That's all." Harmon called. He held the phone to his ear. It rang twice. A voice answered, clipped, formal, with the background texture of an operational duty desk. Harmon gave his name and badge number. He described the hold. He said the name on the card. There was a silence on the other end that lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then the voice said 11 words. Harmon's face, which had begun to reassemble into something functional, collapsed entirely. He lowered the phone. He looked at Roy Caldwell. "General," he said. It came out wrong, too small. He tried again. "General Caldwell." "Yes, the ceremony." Harmon was doing arithmetic he couldn't complete. "Your retirement ceremony today, that's in 47 minutes, yes." Harmon set the card on the table. He looked at it. He looked at the man. "Why?" He stopped himself, started again. "Why are you here like this? Without your detail, without." "Because this is how I test the system," Caldwell said. He uncrossed his legs and stood. He was taller than he'd seemed sitting. I have done this 8 times in 7 years. I walk a standard non-standard access pathway at a duty facility with a valid but non-rank identified credential, and I see what happens. Usually the system works. The credential is verified against the roster, the authorization is confirmed, the person clears. Today it didn't work that way. He picked the card off the table and put it back in his breast pocket. That's also information, he said. He looked at Harmon without heat, without performance, just with the flat, clinical attention of a man noting a result. Please get me to the building. I have people waiting. What happened next at the Pentagon's South checkpoint occurred in a compressed window of 4 minutes and 22 seconds, and it was witnessed by 31 people, 9 of whom were active duty military officers. The first indication that something had shifted was Sergeant Elaine Rios. She had been watching the secondary screening room from the main counter for the past several minutes, and when she saw Harmon emerge from the room with the expression of a man who has reached into a bag expecting a sandwich and found a live grenade, she was already moving. She reached the doorway of the screening room and looked at the man inside. Rios had served 8 years in the Army before joining the Force Protection Agency. She had been stationed at Fort Campbell and then at Fort Meade. She had attended one ceremony at the Pentagon 3 years prior at which the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs had presided. She had stood in a room with him for 40 minutes. She recognized him immediately. She said absolutely nothing for 2 seconds. Then she turned to Harmon. Get the supervisor, now call Chief Watkins. Do not use the radio, use the direct line. Harmon went. Rios looked at Caldwell. General, she said. Her voice was steady, but the color had left her face. I apologize, I should have come to this area sooner. You didn't know what was happening. He looked at her with the same attention he had given Harmon, but different in texture, warmer. What's your name, Sergeant? Rios, sir, Elaine Rios. How long have you been at this post? 14 months, he nodded. He made a small mental note in the way he had always made mental notes. Not written, not logged, filed in the particular archive of a man who has spent 4 decades needing to remember exactly what happened and who was responsible. Chief Leon Watkins, the checkpoint supervisor, arrived from the main building in 3 minutes flat. He was a large man, former Navy, with the compressed energy of someone who had run toward problems for 30 years and had not yet broken the habit. He came through the checkpoint door, saw the secondary screening room, saw Rios, saw Harmon, and then saw the man in the gray work uniform standing at the table with his hands in his pockets. Watkins had been at this post for 6 years. He had met the chairman twice at official functions, had stood 4 feet from him at a Force Protection Agency review board the year prior. He did not go still the way Harmon had gone still. He went straight, every military person in Watkins's body aligned. General Caldwell, he crossed the distance in 4 steps. Chief Leon Watkins, sir, Pentagon Force Protection Agency. This is my post and my responsibility. Chief Watkins. I have already initiated an internal review of this morning's events. The reviewing officer's actions will be... Chief, Caldwell raised one hand, not high, just enough. The gesture of a man who has stopped 100 briefings at exactly the point where the briefing became defensive. I need to be inside the building in the next 30 minutes. Everything else can wait until this afternoon. Yes, sir. I'll personally escort you through. They came through the main checkpoint door together. The pedestrian lane at the south entrance handles, on any given morning, between 60 and 90 individual badge holders in the hour before 8:30. At 8:14 on October 14th, approximately 20 of them were present, civilians, contractors, uniformed personnel, in various stages of queuing or clearing the scanner. The first person to recognize Roy Caldwell was a Marine colonel named Helena Vance, who was second in the queue at the scanner, and who had attended a Joint Chiefs strategy session the previous Thursday at which General Caldwell had chaired the table. She looked at the man coming through the checkpoint door in the gray maintenance uniform. She looked at his face. She said under her breath to no one in particular, "That's the chairman." The ripple moved outward from that sentence. A Navy captain 3 positions back turned and looked. An Army major in the vehicle lane, window down, phone in hand, saw the movement. A senior civilian in a dark coat, 2 steps from the entrance, stopped walking. Roy Caldwell walked through the checkpoint area at the same pace he had been walking all morning, unhurried, purposeful, the pace of a man who had somewhere specific to be and the composure not to run toward it. He did not look at anyone particularly. He acknowledged Rios with a brief nod as he passed her station. The Marine Colonel Helena Vance stepped aside from the queue. She came to attention. It was not a theatrical gesture. It was not performed for the room. It was involuntary and immediate, the response of a body that has spent years training itself to respond to a specific kind of authority, and had suddenly found that authority standing in front of it in a work uniform and scuffed boots. The Navy captain behind her did the same. The Army major, still at the vehicle window, got out of her car. In 11 seconds, every uniformed person in the South checkpoint area had come to attention. And in the particular silence that followed, the silence of a checkpoint that has momentarily stopped processing, the man in the gray maintenance uniform rolled his mop bucket through the door and into the building he commanded. Officer Bryce Harmon stood at the secondary screening area and watched this happen. He stood there for a long time after the door closed. What Harmon did not know, what would only become clear later that morning when the internal review was initiated, was that the mop bucket Roy Caldwell had been rolling was not empty. Inside it, beneath the mop head and the rinse attachment, sealed in a waterproof document sleeve, were the results of an 8-month independent audit. The audit had been commissioned by General Caldwell personally, using a discretionary fund reserved for security reviews, and had been conducted by a team of 3 investigators from the Office of the Inspector General. Its subject was the Pentagon Force Protection Agency's checkpoint credentialing system. Specifically, the pattern of secondary screenings at the south and river entrances over the prior 24 months. The audit findings, which Caldwell had read the night before and had been carrying with him this morning as he approached the checkpoint, were specific. In the 24-month review period, secondary screenings at the south entrance had been initiated 1,847 times. Of those, 1,104, 60%, involved individuals whose primary visible characteristic, as noted in the reviewing officer's own incident logs, was either non-white race, maintenance, or service occupation, or both. Of the 1,847 secondary screenings, 14 had resulted in formal holds. 13 of the 14 formal holds involved black individuals. 12 of those 13 were cleared without finding within an average of 19 minutes. One had resulted in a formal credential challenge that led to a disciplinary review of the challenged individual, a review that was subsequently found to be without basis and closed. The audit identified Officer Bryce Harmon by name in 6 of the 14 formal holds. He was the officer most frequently associated with secondary screening initiations at the south entrance, not by a small margin. By a factor of 3, Roy Caldwell had designed this morning's exercise specifically around the south entrance and specifically around the 07, 30, 08, 30 window, which the audit had identified as the highest frequency period for pattern-based secondary screenings. He had walked through the gate in a maintenance uniform for 2 reasons. The first was to test the credentialing system. The second was to give Harmon exactly what he had been given, the opportunity to perform his pattern in front of 30 witnesses, 9 cameras, and a clean record that could not be disputed. The mop bucket was evidence. The morning was a controlled demonstration. And in approximately 4 hours, when Chief Leon Watkins sat down with the Internal Review Board to begin the formal proceedings, the audit document would come out of its waterproof sleeve and take its place in a file that Harmon's union attorney would later describe, in a moment of exhausted honesty, as the most thorough thing I have ever seen in a misconduct case. The chairman had not been caught off guard. The chairman had set the table. The retirement ceremony for General Roy Caldwell, outgoing chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, began at 09:00 in the Hall of Heroes on the 2nd floor of the Pentagon, and proceeded with the formal precision that 38 years of service had earned. He changed in a private anteroom adjacent to the hall, the gray work shirt and trousers replaced by his dress uniform, 4 stars on each shoulder, the left side of his chest, a topography of commendations that took a person with knowledge of military decorations approximately 90 seconds to read in full. 2 aides straightened his jacket. A third handed him his cover. He looked at himself in the mirror for 3 seconds. He had never liked mirrors at ceremonies. They reminded him of the distance between the uniform and the person inside it, a distance he had spent a career trying to keep honest. He walked into the hall. The room came to attention. At 10:17 that morning, while the ceremony was still in progress, Chief Leon Watkins convened the first session of the internal review in a conference room on the 1st floor. He was joined by the Deputy Director for Security Operations, a senior official from the Force Protection Agency's Office of Professional Responsibility, and a representative from the Pentagon's General Counsel. The audit document was on the table before anyone sat down. Harmon was not present at this session. He had been placed on administrative hold at 7:59, formally, by the Deputy Director's directive, and had been in a waiting room on the 3rd floor since 8:30. The review was thorough. It was also fast. By noon, the preliminary findings had been submitted to the deputy director. By 1 p.m., Harmon had been informed, through the agency's general counsel, that a formal misconduct proceeding had been initiated and that he was suspended with pay pending the outcome. By 3 p.m., the suspension had been amended to without pay, following the general counsel's review of the audit's identification of 6 specific incidents involving Harmon that constituted documented pattern conduct under federal anti-discrimination statutes. His union filed an objection within the hour. The objection cited Harmon's 3 years of service, his absence of prior formal discipline, and what the union described as the extraordinary circumstances of the morning's incident. Specifically, the argument that any officer would have exercised heightened scrutiny in the case of a mismatched access designation. The Office of Professional Responsibility's response to this argument was brief. It noted that the access designation had been correctly filed by the Pentagon facilities director the afternoon prior, that the duty Officer Harmon had initially reached had been a first-week trainee whose unfamiliarity with the classification system did not constitute a system failure, and that the facility's director's direct line, which the individual being screened had provided twice, clearly, by name and title, had not been called at any point during the 41 minutes of the hold. It further noted that of the 6 incidents in which Harmon appeared in the audit's findings, 4 had involved individuals who had also provided verifiable credentials that Harmon had not pursued through standard verification channels. The union's objection was denied. The formal misconduct proceeding was scheduled. In the meantime, and unknown to Harmon, a second process had been set in motion, one that would prove to have considerably longer reach. The audit document that General Caldwell had carried in the mop bucket was not a Pentagon internal document. It had been prepared under the authority of the Office of the Inspector General, which made its findings independently reportable to Congress. The OIG's lead investigator, a woman named Director Constance Abernethy, had been briefed on the morning's events by 3 p.m. Director Abernethy had 22 years of federal oversight experience and a specific professional interest in what the audit document called access equity failures at high-security facilities, a category of civil rights violation that was simultaneously common, difficult to document, and when documented, extremely difficult to dismiss. She had been waiting for a case with the right evidentiary foundation. She now had one. She picked up the phone. The administrative hearing for Officer Bryce Harmon was held 6 weeks after the incident, in a conference room in the Pentagon Force Protection Agency's administrative offices. It was a formal proceeding, not a criminal trial, but it was conducted with the seriousness of one, which was in part because the Office of Professional Responsibility had invited Director Abernethy's office to observe, and in part because the case had attracted the attention of the Department of Defense Inspector General, who had sent a representative. Harmon arrived with his union attorney, a man named Philip Stead who had navigated 11 misconduct hearings in 9 years and who had told his client the night before to answer every question with the minimum number of words necessary and to stop himself before he explained. Harmon had not entirely succeeded at this. He was a person who needed to explain. The presiding officer was Colonel Anita Forsyth, former JAG, now the senior disciplinary officer for the Force Protection Agency. She was 53, small, with reading glasses she wore pushed up on her forehead, and the habit of looking at a person for exactly 2 seconds before she began speaking long enough to make clear that she had actually looked. She looked at Harmon for 2 seconds. She began. Officer Harmon, the record before this panel covers the incident of October 14th, your involvement in 6 prior secondary screening incidents identified by the OIG audit, and the findings of the Office of Professional Responsibility's preliminary review. We are not here to relitigate what is already in the record. We are here for you to answer specific questions, for the panel to consider those answers, and for this office to render a finding. Do you understand the scope of this proceeding? Yes, ma'am. In the incident of October 14th, at what point did you consult the South Entrance security log to verify the individual's prior access history? A pause. I didn't. At what point did you call the Pentagon facilities director, whose name and title were provided to you by the individual being screened? Another pause. I didn't call the director, I called the duty officer. The individual told you the authorization number was 1147C. When did you enter that number into the credentials verification system? Harmon looked at the table. I didn't enter it. Colonel Forsyth made no note. She did not need to. The transcript was recording. Officer Harmon, walk me through your decision to initiate a secondary screening. What observable criterion triggered that decision? Stead touched his client's arm. Harmon looked at his attorney. Stead gave him a small nod that meant, answer carefully. The access level on the badge was higher than standard maintenance. That was the trigger. At what point did you notice the elevated access level, before or after you approached the individual? A long pause. After. So you initiated the approach, including the physical step out of line, before you had reviewed the badge access level. It was not a question. Harmon understood that. Yes. What caused you to initiate the approach before reviewing the badge? Harmon was quiet for 7 seconds. I observed the individual and determined that the situation warranted a closer look. What specific observation led to that determination? The silence in the room had a particular quality. The kind that comes when everyone present understands that the next words spoken are going to be the ones that matter. Stead touched his client's arm again. Harmon looked at his attorney. He looked at the panel. He looked at the table. I observed the individual's appearance and made an assessment. Can you be more specific about the appearance you observed? Harmon said nothing for 9 seconds. No, he said finally. Colonel Forsyth looked at him for 2 seconds. She moved to the next question. The proceeding lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. At its conclusion, Colonel Forsyth recessed for deliberation. The panel returned in 20 minutes. The finding was termination, with cause, effective immediately. Permanent revocation of federal law enforcement certification. Mandatory referral to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division for review of the 6 prior incidents identified in the OIG audit. A formal letter of citation to Sergeant Elaine Rios for appropriate professional conduct. A formal citation to Officer Porter, the junior officer who had first read the card and immediately alerted his supervisor, for correct protocol execution. The finding was entered into the federal record. Director Abernethy's office received a copy. Philip Stead filed a formal appeal within 72 hours. The appeal was reviewed by the Deputy Secretary of Defense's office. It was denied in 14 days. 3 months after the proceeding, on a Tuesday morning in January, the South Entrance checkpoint at the Pentagon was cold and quiet in the particular way of federal buildings in January, the kind of cold that comes through the concrete and the glass and sits in the checkpoint area like a permanent resident. At 7:41, a man came through the pedestrian lane. He was 62 now, or would be in the spring. He wore a dark civilian coat, a gray scarf, and the kind of posture that never entirely leaves a person who has carried a uniform for 38 years. He was no longer the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was retired General Roy Caldwell, and he had an appointment with the incoming chairman, his successor, a woman named General Patricia Osai, whom he had mentored for 9 years and who had asked him to consult on a transition briefing. Handed his visitor badge, today a standard senior retired officer credential, correctly calibrated and clearly labeled, to the scanner. The officer at the main counter was a woman he had not seen before, new posting. Young, she scanned the badge, she looked at the name, she looked at him. General Caldwell. She extended the badge back to him with both hands, a courtesy she had not been formally trained to perform, but performed anyway. Welcome back, sir. Thank you, he said. He took the badge. Clipped it to his coat. He started toward the door. From the secondary inspection area, the concrete platform under the metal canopy, the place where he had stood with his hands folded and watched the timestamp and counted his minutes, a voice came. General! He turned. Sergeant Elaine Rios was coming off the end of her shift, coat on, bag over her shoulder. She had been with the Force Protection Agency for 17 months now, and she would be promoted to Chief Sergeant in the spring, a promotion that owed something in its acceleration to the formal citation that had been entered into her service record in October. She did not stop and salute. He was retired. The protocol did not require it. She stopped and met his eyes, in the way of 2 people who have been in the same room at the same difficult moment and carry a version of it with them. The new credentialing system goes live next week, she said. Cross-reference flagging, mandatory supervisor sign-off before any hold, the whole thing. I heard, he said. Good, she nodded. He nodded. That was enough. He walked through the door. The building was warm. Officer Bryce Harmon looked at a man in a gray maintenance uniform and decided what he saw. He did not look at the credential. He did not call the number. He did not ask a single question designed to find out whether he was right. He made a decision in 4 seconds and spent the next 41 minutes defending it. He was wrong. Not wrong in the way of a man who made an honest mistake under pressure. Wrong in the way of a man who had been doing the same thing for years, in the same place, to the same category of person, and had never once been required to account for it. What Roy Caldwell did walking through that gate with a mop bucket and an audit and the patience of a man who had decided that the most powerful thing he could do on the last morning of his career was prove the problem and force the record was not a performance of dignity. It was discipline. It was 38 years of earning the right to set the table and let the evidence speak. The mop bucket was the point. The ceremony was the evidence. The salutes were the verdict. If this story settled something in you, if you believe in accountability, in the kind of justice that comes from systems being forced to look at themselves, then hit the like button and help this channel reach the people who need to hear these stories. Share this with someone who understands that real authority never needs to announce itself. And subscribe so you never miss the next account of what happens when the right person walks through the wrong door at exactly the right time. He didn't need them to know who he was. He needed the record to show what they did. It does.